Hello and welcome to Insights, the podcast with your host, Joe Pane. Join me in this deep exploration of our personal journeys from ambition to meaning, where we stop living life fast and start living life deep. This is a journey of waking up and realizing that our lives have never been about us, but about others. True success leaves positive ripple effects on other souls. I believe that success needs to be redefined from our own personal ambitious endeavors to be redefined as the value that we leave and give to others around us. Join me now as we begin this journey to deeper connections, even more fulfillment, some fun, curiosity, life, love, and all good things. Your deeper journey from ambition to meaning starts right now. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 65. Joe here. Thank you so much for joining me. And today we're going to explore some thinking around what I call the perception spectrum. So what inspired what I want to share with you here today is what I've been noticing a lot in the environment and certainly my experiences of living life over the last 20 months or so, or 18 months or so with since COVID came onto the scene back in March 2020. What I've been noticing throughout that time, it's fascinating that there are so many opinions, perspectives, thoughts, facts, understandings of what is going on in the world right now. You know, different opinions about the government, different opinions about vaccination, different opinions about COVID itself, different opinions about what's going on in this part of the world, that part of the world. There are lots of very strong opinions out there, and some of them reach the outer edges of extreme from one end to the other end. You know, whether somebody is an avid fan of the extreme conspiracy side, or whether someone's an avid fan of the extreme mainstream side, or anywhere in between, I find that quite fascinating. And I have found that at times when I, what's the word I'm looking for? When I move away from center, and I'll explain what I mean by center in the next couple of minutes, if you can just hang in there with me. But when I move away from the center of this particular perception spectrum that I want to share with you here, I start to feel ordinary. I start to feel an unhealthy sense of uncertainty. I start to feel fear. I start to feel anger, or something emotions leading to anger. I start feeling lots of emotions or states that I don't particularly enjoy, that I don't view as typically being me in terms of how I see myself. So fascinatingly enough, I was having this conversation with Silvana, my wife, just this morning at the time of this recording. And I was sharing with her how when I look at perception, you know, because I don't want to platitude this whole thing by saying, you know, there's only one of us here in the world, which I believe is true. You know, there's only one consciousness, which is true. There's only, everything's the same. We just got different, like we're touching different parts of the elephant, even though we're talking about the same thing. That's true as well. That's accurate as well. So I was thinking, how do I explain this or articulate what I want to say here in a way that absolutely makes sense? And this is what I want to share with you. Just think of a spectrum of water in terms of thermostat. So, and let's just talk about water only. So at one extreme end of the spectrum of temperature, you have steam. And at the other extreme end, we have ice. The only difference are the conditions, where clearly the temperature is very, 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 very low at the extreme end of the ice. And on the steamy end, the temperature is very, very, very warm. We're talking about the same thing, but just different conditions, different dynamic. And then in the middle, we actually have warm water in the middle, warm water. So in that that's the midpoint. So the more we move toward the ice end, the water gets cooler. The more we move toward the steam end, the water gets hotter and hotter and hotter. Now, my philosophy of living is to be in the warm water. Now, everything I'm going to say here can easily be open to judgment, can easily be open to being misunderstood, and can easily be challenged. So the only way I can record a podcast here without anyone talking to me is to just share my opinions and my thoughts on this. So what's giving me a great sense of peace throughout the last 10 years, really, I've been feeling pretty good about life and all good things. And even through all of these, shutdowns or lockdowns, whatever you want to call those lockdowns, even through the uncertainty when COVID first came onto the scene, even with, especially last year here in Melbourne, Victoria in Australia, we had a very long lockdown. I think we're actually in the middle of a lockdown right now as of the time of this recording. And in the news, I was saying the other day that we've just hit the 6-month anniversary. Congratulations, Melburnians. So anyway, I just got to laugh. So anyway, the point I want, and by the way, my giggle, do not misunderstand that giggle. That is not being disrespectful to anyone who has had a hard time with this. It's sometimes in life, it's very healthy to laugh, and sometimes it's healthier to laugh by yourself because people can misunderstand where you're coming from with that. So please do not misunderstand that as a judgy laugh, because it's not. But I find it personally in Joe's life, I just have to laugh for all my different reasons. But the point I want to make, let's go back to the perception spectrum, because in the middle, we have this warm water. That's peace. That's joy. That's balance. That's a balanced thinking, balanced emotion, balanced energy. And what I find is that when I get into that center place, whether I get there through my running, whether I get there through meditation, whether I get there in any other means, a conversation of some kind, is that I find I start to feel so good about life and myself, my personal experience of life and those and people around me that I love and care for. And suddenly I've, I guess you could say in a way, almost shielded myself from the extreme ends. Now, I was saying to Sylv, is that putting my head in the sand? Is that what that means? And I'll say no, because head in the sand means I wouldn't even know that this perception spectrum or this range of perspective even existed. And I do tune into mainstream media every day to see what's going on. I want to know what's going on with the shutdown. I want to know what's going on with the reporting and all these different opinions of what's going on in the world. I also want to know about how markets and economies have been affected by what's going on. So I tune into mainstream media to just see what's going on in the generic world. I take it with a bit of grain of salt, just like I take the other end. I've got these other media platforms that I listen to that are more conspiratorial and challenging and quite different. And I take those with a little bit of grain of salt as well. I listen to both ends of the spectrum. And as soon as I find myself getting torn or feeling emotional or feeling anger or feeling an unhealthy flavor of uncertainty, I bring myself back to the center. I bring myself to the warm water. Now, warm water means in human behavior, this is just my way of looking at it, is when you're being loyal and living in alignment to your values. That's the center point, the midpoint. The warm water is exactly that, because our values are emotional states. So when we're living in alignment to our values, we feel good, just like it feels comfortable being in warm water. We feel that we're ourselves, however we choose to define ourselves. And in that warm water, we are living our truth. Now, that truth doesn't mean that it has to be unconditionally expressed to the world, because what I have found is that if I choose to share my specific opinion on what's going on, I'm going to draw the opposite opinion. And I have no interest, and I can't be bothered, to be frank, to actually have a debate with people about what my thoughts are about this, that, and the other, right? And that's not what this podcast is about anyway. This is not what am I trying to think of? The word provoke. I'm not here to provoke people and piss people off. It's not my thing. It's not my gig. It's not my journey. My journey is to add value and expand our awarenesses around this journey of ambition to meaning. Remember, that was if you've ever listened to the first episode that I recorded way back in 2019, the whole premise of this podcast series was to share different perspectives on this wonderful journey that we're all on from ambition to meaning. And one thing that one of many things that I've become clear on is how to get to this midpoint, how to be in this warm water. And that also means having relationships or being surrounded by people, or be in a relationship with a friend or with a romantic partner, or whatever your relationship situation is, with people that you genuinely align to. I think I shared in one of my previous episodes that, my definition of freedom is living in complete alignment to your values, is living in complete loyalty of your values, where you have got a platform or a safe environment where you can express your truth and be accepted and loved and cared for because of who you are, right? I understand and I'm aware that there's limitations to what I'm saying, and I guess there's only so much I can get across in one, 20-minute episode here, or 10-minute, or whatever, however long I've been talking for. So the point I want to make is that this is really important to understand, that no matter what our perspective is on what's going on, ice is water in a different expression. Steam is water in a different expression. Warm water is the same thing. It's warm water being expressed as water. It's all H2O. So, in other words, we are, from that perspective, all one. We are all the same. We are all in the same radio, just broadcasting different stations, but it's all the same. So for me, when I look at this, I go, well, why do these extreme ends actually exist? The steam and the ice. Well, we know that they exist because, in terms of water, because of the temperature differences, because of the environmental difference to those two things of ice and steam. Well, it's the same with our psychological environment, our thinking environment, our mindset environment. The environment of our mind determines what part of the spectrum we slide from, or which part of the spectrum we're attracted to. Ice is no more wrong or no more right than steam, right? So if you've experienced someone who's got an opinion on what's going on with the whole situation of the world around COVID and everything, especially there's aspects of COVID, like vaccinations, that can really spark different things in people. I've seen it happen from both ends of the steamy part and the icy part, right? As far as the water metaphor goes. Here's the thing, is that the opposite end of the spectrum is, and this is one of my highlights here that I want to share with you here, is that the opposite end of the spectrum is just as valid as the other end. Just as valid. That's the reason why we have economies. Economies and markets work because there are two opinions on whether that thing's going to go up or go down. When someone is buying a stock or buying a thing or selling a thing, someone has to sell. For that person to sell to the buyer, the seller's thinking, this baby's going down. The buyer's buying from the seller because they're thinking, this baby's going up. They're both in the same transaction, in the same spectrum of experience, but it's just a different spectrum. One's got an opinion that's going down and one his opinion is going up. Now, guess what? Like any stock or any crypto or anything that if you're into any of this stuff, is that eventually both buyer and seller are right. Like at some point, they're going to be both right. At some point, the stock's going to come back down and the seller's going to be right. At some point, the stock's going to go up and the buyer's going to be right. As long as they're both in the game for long enough, they're both going to be right. It's the same with all of the stuff going on in the world that's plugging a lot of people in, right? There are certain useful facts in mainstream media that are useful. There are certain facts in the so-called conspiratorial, these underground sort of channels that I also tune into. There's certain aspects of what they bring that is just as valid as the people who are in mainstream media, just as valid. Not all of the extremes are valid or accurate, right? We've seen also, even in the science world, the fact-driven Newtonian, well, not Newtonian, but in the fact-driven science world that is evidence-based, we see a whole wide spectrum of conclusions about different things about what's going on in the world. Isn't that fascinating? I find that amazing. Now, we might look at that and say, well, that's, because of this, and this, and, this one's edited, that one's not, and this one, is smothered, and this one is not. Whatever it is, here we are in the spectrum of perception. And you and I have got a choice on whether we want to dance with the ice or, hang out with the steam or be in the warm water or be in anywhere in between. And I've just found that being in the center not only centers me and gives me a sense of peace, it also gives me a healthy curiosity and a healthy compassion for anybody's opinion on what the heck is going on in the world. I hope this is making some kind of sense. Some people might say, well, that's a bit of a fence-sitter kind of a opinion. Well, call it what you wish, but that's what it is for me. And I wanted to share with you that all that matters well, I think I'll speak for myself, that all that matters for the way I see things is how we're feeling. Because in life, if you ever study the wonderful work of Lao Tzu, who wrote the Tao Te Ching, the Tao is about being in the now. The Tao is being in the moment. Now, I'm not talking about the meditating 24/7 and just trying to be in the moment. I'm saying, where are you at right now? Like, what's going on right now? Sometimes I'll say to a client, when I'm doing a training or I used to work with individuals, and I'd say, so what's the problem right now in this moment as we sit here breathing together, having this wonderful conversation? What's the problem right now? The only psychological problems that we have is when we start to go to the extreme ends of the spectrum of perception. Because steam, we can't hang out in steam for too long. It's too bloody hot. It'll hurt us. Just like extreme opinions. We can't hang out with the ice. Eventually, it'll burn us too, just in different ways. It's unsustainable. It's like extreme anger is one end of the spectrum, right? Extreme, how do I say it? Extreme laughter and over the top, crazy joy can't be sustained because these are all emotional experiences that move around. So I just find coming back to center gives me clarity. It gives me a healthy appreciation of everybody and where everybody's coming from. I always remind myself of how markets work in the world and how a seller and a buyer that exchange a transaction simultaneously right there in that moment of now, both have got completely different opinions on what's about to happen in that particular transaction, what the future brings. It's incredible. And if it wasn't for the spectrum of perception, these extremes and everything in between, we wouldn't have the experience that we're having. We wouldn't be having this whole experience of life, this whole experience of just being. Because I believe that the purpose of life is to experience. It's about having experiences. I think it's a wonderful thing. And being in the center also makes me curious about a whole other thing. Now we're going to go into a little bit of woo-woo here for a moment. But being in the center in the warm water makes me curious about who we really are. And I've got no clue. I don't have an answer to that. But let me tell you, I often think to myself, well, what is it? What is the intelligence that's beating my heart? What is it that is seeing through my eyes? Because everything in my body is happening automatically. I'm not trying to breathe. It's just happening. I'm not trying to blink. It's just happening. I'm not trying to pump my blood. It's just happening. I'm not trying to raise the sun in the morning. It's just kind of happening. Everything's happening automatically. And I'm wondering, who is it that's doing that? What is it that's doing that? And every time I sit to meditate, I'm in search for who or what that is. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because this is one of the avenues of thinking that brings me back to center, that gives me a healthy sense of gratitude, a deep sense of appreciation, a beautiful, quiet sense of joy. And I really dig that. So whatever your center is, however you get there. Now, it doesn't mean that you never visit the extreme ends, but try. Like I've tried to visit the extreme ends, and it just feels, to me, it just feels too extreme. It feels, I don't know. If I spend a day only listening to mainstream media and a day listening to underground channels of other media platforms that are of the opposing opinion of mainstream media, if I hang out with one or the other, doesn't matter which one, for long enough, I feel like shit. I feel, what's the word? Powerless, empty, meaningless. Like I won't go on, but that's how I feel if I hang out with the steam for too long or with the ice for too long. And I start to think, bring yourself back to where you need to be, in the middle, in the warm water. Be true to your own values and your own way of seeing things and believing things and what makes you feel good. Because you living in it's impossible to feel good when you're out of alignment to your values. It's impossible to feel good when you're living or betraying your own values. Impossible. Because our values, as you've heard me say in my other work, it's our emotional compass. And as I said just a few minutes ago in this podcast, it's an emotional state. So anyway, I just hope this gives you something to think about, because we're all the same. We all look different, but we're all the same. The essence of what is beating my heart, whatever the intelligence is beating my heart, is exactly the same intelligence or consciousness or energy or frequency or vibration or whatever you want to call it that's beating your heart. It's exactly the same. That's what I'm curious about. What is that? What is that? So anyway, maybe we'll expand upon that thought in another episode. But anyway, I just thought I'd share my latest thoughts as I sit here inspired. I was inspired this morning to record this because I've been listening to the wonderful work of a fellow called Alan Watts, who's no longer with us. He passed away back in 1973. But if you go to YouTube and just look up Alan Watts, and he's got and there's a podcast that's his son has recently put together. So if you look that up, just go, however you want to search for Alan Watts. And he's got such an eloquent way with language. He is a true linguist and has a way of deconstructing the complexity of our perception of the world in a way that makes sense. And it inspires me to be in the warm water, to be in the middle, to sit in the middle and have a healthy sense of curiosity and a deep compassion for both ends of the scale. Because I ain't hanging out at the very ends. Because when you hang out at the very ends, beyond the end, you fall off. You lose your way. You lose your way. So for whatever it's worth, I reckon it's kind of cool sitting in the middle. And sometimes you want to sway from the middle and go from end to end a little bit just to see how it feels. Sure, and we've got all of our reasons to do that. That's fine. I mean, all good. Whatever we want to do. I mean, hey, it's all, we all live our own lives. But I just thought I'd share this spectrum. The spectrum of water, which is a fact. When it's really hot, the water turns into steam. When it's really cold, it turns into ice. And in the middle somewhere is that beautiful balance. And that's what we all have. We're all seeing the world through our own unique spectrum of perception. And as Dr. David R. Hawkins said, the ego cannot access reality. It only has access to its perception of reality. And everything that you and I see is through the filters of our ego, the filters of our belief systems, our values even. It's the filtration of our personality, our mind, our brain, whatever you want to call it. So none of us can access reality directly. We can only access our perception. And our perception is completely within our control. And that can seem really difficult if we're hanging out to the extremities of this perception spectrum. That's very difficult to do if you do that. So anyway, I hope there's something in this for you. I would love to hear some comments. I'm not sure how you would do that. I think if you actually, even if you find me on my fan page and message me at Joe Pane Insights, I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on what I've shared here today. And as I said, my intention is never to spark or provoke. My intention is to add value and give us all something to think about. So I hope that helps in some weird way. And as always, I really appreciate you tuning in. This has been episode 65. Really thoroughly enjoyed you being here with me. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now. I'm Joe Pane, and you've been listening to Insights, the podcast. If you haven't yet, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. You can now follow my insights on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'm looking forward to being with you again very soon in the next episode of Insights, the podcast.